Hello, I'm Eli Wilkins, and this is my influences and inspirations for my next body of work. Starting off with a quote by Alan Watts, a philosopher of the conscious art movement in the 1960s. This is the real secret of life, to be completely engaged with what you're doing in the here and now. And instead of calling it work, realize it is play. Really enjoy that work, or that quote, because it really focuses on what we should be doing, and I think it really plays into what we're going to be doing with this class. Starting off with Franz Hals, amazing portrait painter. I specifically chose this one for the texture and the pattern of the fabric because the amazing texture and detail he puts into it, especially in a white fabric. I really like to work on texture and full bodiness of clothed figures more. And moving to this body of work with gods and goddesses, but mainly for the supernatural juxtaposition of it and the idea of surrealism behind it and symbolism specifically, mainly for the circling of the idea or circling of the painting and the symbolism of the imagery that they put into it. And William Eddy's version, or William Eddy's reclining female nude, the contrast between the starkness and temperate storm comparatively to the soft female reclined figure, the color and the nature of the painting is very interesting. It's a very clashing contrast, and I like it a lot. And it creates a very interesting composition, especially for color and light, but also idea. And moving to the Annunciation, the Italian Renaissance kind of information that we get for specifically for the perspective and the symbolism they use for telling stories and this idea of religion and contextual information and the use of symbolism to tell that information and the development of perspective specifically to create composition that I learned in art history I find very interesting and important for structural composition. So I chose the Annunciation from the Italian Renaissance. And the figure's not really figure-esque for what I like, but there are symbols and representation of full-bodiedness in the figures that I enjoyed also, but it creates the sense of illusion of depth that I want to work with. And specifically with drama for the painting is this one from Joseph Wright. It has a sense on the battlefield of obviously sorrow, but it deals with this compelling conflict of life and death with the newborn and then the widow hovering over the presumably dead husband, and how the social political atmosphere affects an artist and how it can play into the world of art contemporarily for the artist. And I think this one does an extremely good job dealing with the after effects of war in this time frame. And then moving on to composition base, really, of 3D and structural base. And this one is with the frame presenting 3D composition, making this 2D painting more, giving more depth to create an interesting effect for this particular piece. And I think using that information can really evolve the piece of work. And I really enjoy how this frame makes the piece more developed. And not only 2D paintings, but I also find sculpture very interesting. Specifically, this one I found at SF MoMA, the Star Maiden. It has a fantastic use of wet drape and obviously figure, and this very supernatural looking female form of like a goddess. And specifically, what drew me to it was the crown and her very powering stance, with her hands above her head, and this interesting crown with this very organic, geometric kind of shape, which I find a lot of very interesting detail. And focusing with the idea of different versions of like religion and how we view the world, and this Indian version of a different culture, and how their view of religion has very many different forms of like naturalistic and animalistic forms to tell a story. And the fact that it's also lasted so many centuries is just very interesting. But specifically like this one, Varaha from the 9th century, they have this very interesting complex association between animals and human forms, and the figures are very full and well developed. And I think it really plays into ideas we have now about creatures and more conscious movement, and it really plays into how the Indian conscious idea of religion pushed into the Western culture and created these new visual fields, if you'll say, that'll be coming up later on. We move back more to the European style of figure and form, especially with John Anster Fitzgerald and this surrealistic idea of fairies, these humanistic characteristics, and this very secluded kind of escapism look. It's a very fine, detailed imitation of nature, and obviously a fantastical version of nature, and a reflection on the artist and the world he was working in as more of a recluse, and the escapism of what was happening in the industrial era and war time frame of when he was working. And these fairies all have very humanistic characteristics, and he has a very sharp eye for nature and how things worked. And I like that he incorporated the frame to fit the painting specifically, with using branches and twigs to make the frame to really encompass and incorporate the dreamlike nature of the painting into the full format with the frame. And same with Francisco Goya, where he uses representation of his time with Saturn devouring his sun, because he's talking about the destructive nature of his government at the time with the war. And this is more of like a social impact for statement from him about the issues in his life and time frame when this was going down, when he was an artist, and how it's relevant, I feel like, as an artist to talk about social impacts, and especially political impacts that are having on our life. And it's almost impossible not to, especially in times like these. But it'll eventually play its way into your artwork, and I feel like it's something we should embrace. And I think Francisco Goya did a very good job and a very intriguing job. And this is one of my favorite ones because it's also a mythological surrealist piece. And same with this Japanese woodcut. It has a very interesting sense of space and design, and the way they use this very interesting technique with this monster-esque kind of feel to it. But I like the way the character designs are and how detailed it is. And it's just a very different take on art culture than it is from the Western European style that we see all the time. And same with this African tribesman face mask. It plays with this animalistic and natural feel, but also the man-made hard edges of the triangles and the squares, and it blends the organic with the natural. And same with this wood carved frame of a mirror at the Sacramento Crocker Museum. It has a very natural, flowing, organic shape to it, and a really nice flow. It even incorporates some actual figure into it as well. But I really like it because it has just a very smooth, flowing, organic feel, like feathers or waves. And I think that's a really interesting value to play into, is allowing nature to be our guide and to look to nature for inspiration. Like this Moonlight study, I really enjoy a lot. It was done by Moonlight, and I'll be working with oils as well. And I feel like nature is something that we can really look into to find artistic creativity, like this one I found in the UC Student Gallery. Is just a contrast between black and white and color. And also this one online, where it's a nice juxtaposition and a way to play with ideas, especially within nature and different formats of media. Specifically, this is like a Photoshop. And with Chirobata uses a very interesting version of the landscape with the clouds of a setting sun over Sacramento. It's very nice, dark, and colorful, organic, moving composition where there's a lot of depth and movement in the clouds. And it's just beautiful. And the way he just makes everything flow together in somehow a seamless motion. And they don't even look like clouds, it looks like something else, like organic. But it's just so capturing and inspiring. And to work that I like bioorganic or biomechanical work like this by Bruce Pennington, who did a lot of sci-fi covers. He obviously had some training in anatomy. He has a lot of detail and color theory and just movement, and up close you can see the beautiful highlights and just the organic shapes and details that he puts into it. And obviously a study and lover of nature. And contemporary tattoo artists also use similar ideas like this with contrasting light and color, and really creates depth in organic biological looking way, and also with a mechanical way using light and color to really give it form and depth. And artists like Andy Goldsworthy using uh, actual nature to create art, using leaves he finds and color, and creating just beautiful pieces of work out of awe-inspiring color that I think is a great way to find inspiration, is just going outside. And a more contemporary artist that does it also, and just being able to find these things to make art out of, and just knowing that that's a way to get back to it. And then moving back into the figure, we have Aimee Sen, who uses like disposed branches and uh, leaves to create these figures out of wood in this really interesting way to create these really interesting forms. I think that's a good way to tie back into the figure, but also finding that organic shape is something that I really like, and like building up in that organic material or forms is really important. And finding different ways to use it, like different methods of painting, like impressionism, or using your canvas a different way. Like Sam Gilliam doesn't use canvas exactly. He painted and used it as a sheet and hung it instead of using a traditional canvas, and using different ways to push that idea of different realms of media. Like Gerhard Richter in Abstract Expressionism was my favorite non-figurative works and artist is Gerhard Richter, and I chose this one specifically for the color and the fact that Expressionism really pushes the boundaries with what you can do for it, and pretty much answer any question or work around any theory or objective you're looking for in a social way or a political way or a personal way. And using mixed media and different ways to do that also, I think really drives socio-political points across, especially in a world where you as an artist are working towards a goal of speaking about your time, like Noah Purifoy does with the Watts riots, using a burned down piece of the building to talk about the civil rights movement and what happened. Same with Norman Lewis and this interesting composition between the title and the actual painting, these black and white, black with white shapes all over it, called America the Beautiful. But if you look closely, it's more of a akin to a white right meeting, basically the Ku Klux Klan meeting, and how as a black artist that this is not what America really stands for, but what it is at the time, and how the civil rights movement is being uh, used in the art world. And he's bringing this to light of the racism. I think it's a very interesting aspect to use. Like Wadsworth Jarrell is also using in back in the figurative form, creating out of context with a motif to use words and letters and color to empower these images to really make them stand out for what they're worth and uplift the movement and the art itself to speak about what he was doing. And I really like it because it incorporates the figure and a different aspect of how to make the figure instead of just one way, and really speaks about different aspects and the culture that they're in. And Eckhart Collins pushes it with the racial implication of race and figure in the art world with a Black nude model. And I think that's a very big step with in the art community and a civil rights movement to find what's acceptable and what's beautiful and what's considered art. And this is a big movement, I feel like, in theirs in a way to actually push that And I think it's necessary as an artist is to step those boundaries and find out what you can do as an artist. And then going back just to simple forms and shapes and colors and inspiration, this is folded paper. I look for different shapes and forms and things like that. And then the idea of using oil paints is this contemporary artist, C.T. Nelson, uses oil paints in a very interesting way to build texture and color using glazes and 3D effects in just this very interesting manner. And I've worked with Izzy Ivy in a workshop before using different to learn different glaze techniques and a way to really just work within yourself to try to find meaning in your own artwork and develop something out of nothing, I guess, in a conscious art kind of way, really looking inward instead of outward. And I think that is a very interesting aspect to work with because Alex Grey is also a big conscious art movement painter. And this took him 5 years as an oil painter. And I think it goes back to the quote, it's more play than work. And I think that's what it needs to be boiled down to. And Michael Devine is a San Francisco based artist that I like a lot that combines this very interesting feel of organic and natural flowing elements and glazes combined with some figure aspects as well and a surrealistic, powerful imagery and similar to like a conscious art idea, I think really sets it apart. And he uses a lot of very strong colored aspects that I like a lot. Same with Alex Grey again. He uses obviously studies the anatomical structure of the figure a lot and does a lot of glazing and figure work. Also uses events that finds important to himself and the field of things that interest him, like conscious movement and eclipse and certain theologies and religions and ideas that come up, which I also like to play with, especially in symbolism. And I think this is a good one also of what you can express for an event. And then finally, Eric De La Cruz. He plays a lot with glazing techniques in the figure and a lot of juxtaposition. And I really like his look for the way he incorporates figure with different aspects and the way he blends color. And I find it very intriguing for the surrealistic kind of way I like to do it as a contemporary way of painting. And he really puts together the figure and the background and juxtapositions in very interesting and dramatic ways with a lot of expressive color. And I like to work more in that line also, but I'll be pushing it with some oil colors and some different ideas. But I think I'll be focusing on the figure mainly and playing with these ideas that I was just looking for. And I hope you enjoyed my inspirations and influences that I like to look at to get inspired. And thank you for watching.